Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero, the show that revolutionizes personal engagement in the world and fortification of your life. Let's get to it. We're brought to you by Fox & Sons, foxandsons.com, the best place to get your BBC. I never start my day with anything less than BBC in my mouth, and I suggest if you like BBC, you go to foxandsons.com. Get that big, bold coffee and put it in your mouth. foxandsons.com. Promo code 0 at checkout for 18% off on any order $25 or more. That's foxandsons.com for that BBC big, bold coffee. Put it in your mouth, baby. And the Mark Claire Show. If you enjoyed Mark Claire with Lions of Liberty, you're going to really dig the Mark Claire Show. Mark Claire has gone beyond the realm of politics to dig into the esoteric meaning of life in all sorts of different avenues, whether it be entrepreneurship, ghosts, goblins, Bigfoot, demonic entities, religion. Mark Claire is diving into all of it, and he's not afraid to tackle any task. So go check out the Mark Claire Show. Thank you, as always, Tom Burton, for the music. And you can find this show and many more at the libertarianinstitute.org. That's the libertarianinstitute.org. That's where you'll find me, Patrick McFarland, Scott Horton, Keith Knight, Will Porter, Kyle Anzalone, and a host of other writers like Kim Robinson. Go to libertarianinstitute.org and keep track of everything that we are doing for you. Okay, I'm here with Jason once again from 2-Bit Podcast. What's up, man?
I'm always pleased and honored to be here with you, Tommy. What's going on? Not much. I'm in Australia. It's hot. It's summer. Hot. It's hot. It's hot.
Yeah. Yep.
Kangaroos are jumping.
Well, I'm in Southeast Texas, so it's just weird. So 2 days ago it was 35 degrees, and now it's today the low was 62. And then next week,
is it like
next week
it's like tornado season for you, or
no, we don't really get tornado. We have hurricane season, mainly through the summer into September. But no, we don't really have tornado season where I'm at. But yeah, so it'll be back in the 30s next week, and then maybe it'll start warming up permanently after that. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen down here? The weather's always like really crazy during the quote unquote winter time around here.
Yeah, we just bake. It's like we go from rainy season to I live in an oven season. Sorry if any Jewish people are listening to it, might be triggering, but you know, we go into the oven, turn it up to 520. These are the two consistents I live in. It's nice is it's no longer fly season. Fly season's the worst. That's the absolute, because I work outside too, right? So you're just like breathing it. It's like you're in Lord of the Flies. I'm looking for pig's head on a stick somewhere because it's just brutal. But then they bring out the dung beetles, and that kind of clears things up a little bit, and then you can breathe without getting your protein as well. So
we get a lot of rain down here because we're right on the Gulf, and so there is a lot of rain. Last summer though, I don't think it rained for I think we went like 2.5 to 3 months, no rain. And it was just, we were just baking down here. We're used to it being humid and all that, and it was just such a dry, miserable heat all summer long, and the rain wasn't coming through to cool us down any, so it was a pretty brutal summer last summer. Um, it was hard to keep plants alive and things going because it was just so dry. But it's been raining here the last couple of weeks. It's been raining pretty regularly. My yard is back to its normal conditions of being a swamp, and I can no longer walk around it. And so there's that. And so yeah, it just
The ducks must be loving it.
the one duck that's hadn't been eaten by the coyotes. Yes, he's having a
Yeah.
blast. But he sleeps up here during the day most of the day because he swims all night long because the coyotes won't get him in the middle of the pond. So he has figured out his system. But no, like even like last summer,
That's why he's the one. He's
yeah,
he's the one
he's the
smart
only
duck,
one that figured it out, man. He figured out the
You got to breed.
problem.
You got to breed from that stock.
Yeah, right. But all right, well, we're gonna dive into this book, Jesus and the Talmud. We're going to
Wait. I thought this was the Weather Network. Now I thought that's
weather-
just what the
yeah.
show was going to
we could do that.
be. Life down on the farm.
Yeah, no doubt. And this was written by Peter Schaefer, and Peter Schaefer was he was a professor of religious studies at Princeton. He ran into some issues, accused of being anti-Semitic whenever he like kind of signed off on the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, and then he received letters of support from 95 museum directors and curators, 445 Jewish studies scholars, and 45 Talmudists. So from 83 to 2008, he was a professor for Jewish studies at, I can't pronounce this German stuff, but it was a university in Berlin. And since 1993, he has been co-editor of Jewish Studies Quarterly. So he's right there kind of within the Jewish network and really kind of understands the ancient origins of the rabbinic Judaism. So the first thing I wanted to cover, because I don't want to come across as one of these weird dudes that are just like, screw Jews, but I have a purpose in reading this, and there's a purpose in kind of diving into this. And the purpose is that we have this thing in the United States that's called Judeo-Christian values, which is just so strange to me whenever I start digging in to Christianity and then looking at what Judaism believes. I'm like, it just doesn't make sense how these things operate within the same network. And in the introduction of this book, Jesus in the Talmud, Peter Schaefer wrote extensively for like probably 2 pages how the history of Christians and Jews was recorded from like early days, and how there was always this kind of fight between the two sides because of the rejection of Christ and the way that the Jews and rabbinic Jews viewed Christ and Christianity as basically heretical. And he spent several pages discussing these books and several different books that he's citing and he's sourcing and he's pulling out of. And so I thought it was very important to kind of mention that this is that part of what our issue is today is this whole sola scriptura kind of idea that you're not supposed to read any other books, because it's kind of like you've lost the history of what was happening and how we got to the point that we're at. And so in a lot of ways, you're embracing the enemies of your faith and the enemies of Christ, and in doing so, you're supporting all these wars and this terrorism, this way that they interact with the world, especially there locally in the Middle East. And so there's something's got to give. There's got to be this kind of like breaking point, I think, to where Christianity like steps back and goes, okay, wait a second. Like, I can't be supporting everything these people are doing because what they're doing goes against my values. It goes against who I am as a Christian person. You know, I was thinking about it. It was like in the old covenant, right? You had the followers of Moses came out of bondage in Egypt and became Israel. And then in the new covenant, you had the followers of Christ that came out of bondage of to sin to become the new Israel, right? And so in a lot of ways, if you're leaning on those followers of the old covenant, you're kind of forfeiting your inheritance a lot of the ways that Esau did for like a bowl of soup, right? You're like, what are you really getting out of this? And is it worth it? You know?
Yeah, I think okay. To do a little Girardian stuff here as well. One thing Rene Girard talks a lot about the Jesus story is that it breaks myth. The reason why comparing Jesus to a mythological structure is that when you look at the Gospels, no God ever before or since has humbled himself the way that our God has, in terms of being reincarnated or being incarnate, I should say, in a body of a human, to suffer, to willfully be sacrificed, to become the scapegoat, to be willfully sacrificed for us in order to essentially break the bonds of death and deliver us into a new covenant. This is partly why, or I would say largely why, Christian conversion was so powerful in the pagan world, because that story, once conveyed, is it is unlike any other what any other god has ever been about. And there's been multiple different versions of different spirits, but this Lord who's come down and humbled himself in that way presents us a model that's unlike any other model. So what's important here, and this is why the Judeo-Christian myth has to be addressed and permanently disabled, I believe. And this is, again, I'm not going to speak against Jewish people or even Zionists or anything like that. Let's put that to the side. The issue for Christians is that who do we model? Well, if we are modeling Christ, then we must model Christ in his entirety. Now we fail, and we sin, and we're fallen, and we will fall short of the mark most likely. But that is what our task is. That's what's before us. You can't confuse that with anything else. You can't say, well, Christ, but or this version of Christ or that. No, it's Christ. Right? You have to become that's why God presented himself in this way, is to give us a model to go, what do we do? How do we present ourselves in the world? This is what you do.
Mm-hmm.
This is who you are. This is how you are and how you comport yourself in the world. To muddle that in any way, shape, or form it's heresy, essentially, right? Like you get into pray list real fast. So I think we can talk about purity, we can talk about purity without the spiral in this case. It's not about it's about setting hard taboos and hard lines of somebody saying this is what this is and it's not this. You can't. The differentiation has to remain very distinct. Otherwise, you get very muddled theology, which again can lead people astray and get to the point where you start thinking passions are fine and sins are forgivable, and I'm the arbiter of grace and all these other wacky things that are besieging a lot of the Protestant denominations. We're seeing it there first, right? But it's creeping into the center.
Mm-hmm.
So when I can understand how people from outside of this can go, well, one of the things I say quite a bit often is that the ritual and the reality are one. These two things substantiate each other. So if you take, let's say, the Orthodox tradition and people who live in that are occupying the Orthodox reality, and you take, let's just say, the Roman Catholics, if you zoom out far enough, the two faiths to the uninitiated would look essentially identical, with very minor differences, mostly stylistically. When you zoom in, the differences magnify and intensify, because what I would say is the real differentiation between the two denominations or the two worldviews is the rituals. So that which we ritualize creates a reality, and that ritual and that reality substantiates the rituals. And this is how we go forward.
Right.
When you start to break rituals, or you start to question them, or you start to alter them, you start to alter the reality itself. And at some point you spin out, and now you're into nihilism. Now you're into something that, you can call it Christian. Christ is involved. There's a guy, Christ, and he's walking around and doing stuff like that. Mormons, I'm talking to you. You can have all the things, all the vestiges, but it can be a hollow faith, because the rituals are what keep it together. And the closer you are to the capital R reality that is Christianity, the better you will be. The better you will be. Or, we can go the other way and go, or don't practice. It's not for everybody, folks. Like, it is for everybody, but it's not for everybody right now. It's not for you might need to go through some other stuff to be delivered to this truth. That's fair, and that's fine. Like, I don't want to be accused of proselytizing or converting. That's not what God put me on the earth for. At least not currently. Anyways, we'll see what his plans are later down the road. But that's a long-winded talking point. But just to substantiate your point, you got to get this stuff right. And if just one last point, it's like early on in my conversion and Orthodox education, for some reason, I just got the Trinity. Like when I looked at it after 32 years of being an atheist and looked at it again uncritically, it just clicked for me. Like, I didn't have a problem with it, let's say, and I just kind of thought of it like, well, yeah, it's Trinity, like energies and essences. Okay, you get it, right? Like, what's the hang up? Why is this so important? And I was reading something by Father Seraphim Rose. I think it was in his Orthodox Survival Guide. And I don't remember the exact passage or what triggered it to me, but it was like, I read something, but he said, I'm like, okay, this is why. This is why the Trinity is important. Because when you get this wrong, you get everything else wrong. It can be the starting point of a massive fractal error. Because it all comes from that. We are a Trinitarian religion. We have a Trinitarian phronema worldview that's based out of the Trinity. That's why there's no Judeo-Christian. And I know some people go, well, the Jews were talking about the Trinity and this X and we, yeah. But substantiated in form and function, like, we are Trinitarians. And that's why you can call it the Abrahamic religions, you can call it whatever kind of soup you want to put it into, but it's like, recite the Nicene Creed and then get back to me. Right? Like, yeah. Do you believe in this? No. Okay, well, then you're something else. And that's fine. We can have that discussion, but you're not part of this group. And I think we have to become more and more, Lord forgive me for saying like forceful, but we need to be more clear and more, what's the word I'm looking for, Tommy? More self-assured, let's say. We need to present our faith as not as a test, but as a proof, and be like, no, this is what this is, and this is what it isn't, and that's it. There's end of discussion. Like, we're not debating this anymore. Jay Dyer can, God bless him, but I think for most of us, we can just go, nope, hard line, nope, thank you, see you later, bye.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in one of the things that struck me is whenever I started like really digging into the ideas for this podcast was, this whole old covenant, new covenant thing, and really reflecting on how Christ would say, my kingdom is not of this world. Like whenever he was talking to Pontius Pilate, he's just like, my kingdom is not of this world. And that really got me thinking. And it was like, this spot on a map that everybody is so worried about. Oh, this is the Holy Land. It's like, no, that's not what we're called for. That's not what we're doing here, right? Like we're not we have to be in the world, but not of the world. Like this was, told to us specifically. And as you said, we're all falling short, and we're all, struggling and in our own ways, and doing our own things and getting over our own passions and moving forward. But that's not, an excuse to say, well, this is just the way it is, and this is where I am, and I'm just going to quit. And it's like, no, that's not the way this works, right? I'm wearing my
I mean, you can.
wearing my death to the world shirt today, so I'm like, yeah, let's get them,
I was looking for mine. I was looking for mine. I think it's in the wash somewhere. I've twice now. Last week with Buck, and this week I'm like, oh, I gotta find that. Here's an unpopular. Unpopular. Here's a possibility, and I'm just shooting this out as a possibility. It, quite possibly the reason why. The reason. A reason why Christ appeared in Jerusalem when he did, certainly could have been just as much about the Romans as it was about the Jews, and because I mean we can see what was substantiated and what eventually happened with the Romans in terms of Christianity working inside of it, transforming the empire into a Christian theology with Byzantium, like. These things are set in motion. The more I reflect on God's grace and this idea of suffering, in a modern sense, let's say, quite often what we see as a suffering, or what we see even as a boon, or we're trying to piece these things together because we're pattern-seeking creatures, and we're always trying to find the reason, like why is this happening, Lord? Why me? Like, even a good or a bad way. And quite often you don't really understand the sequence of events until much later. And then you can look back and you can reflect on it going, oh, okay. So all these things had to happen to get me to here. And from here, I'm always presented with choices. And each choice I make, as I receive grace, and as I go further down this royal path, I still have choices, but the choices become clear. Like you begin to weed out all the other possible, stray roads, and stay upon the path. And that's the clarity that God will give you, in a sense. But it's still not on you to discern all of this stuff. That's why we were saying before, like before the show, is like having a spiritual father or having a priest that you can talk to in times of troubles or in times of indecision can be very important, because sometimes it's very in all the cases that I've experienced, it's usually just like a little like no nudge, like no, you're good. You're just you're concentrating too much on this. You got to look over here. Like you're getting a bit too prideful. It's vainglory, like and that's all it takes. It's not usually some massive event. That's something that I think is uniquely Christian, from my understanding of it, anyways. And again, I'm just I'm a white belt in this, Tommy. So I never like to fight. I never like to fight above my weight class,
right? Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like the distinctions in Christianity are clear. That's why it isn't Islam. It isn't Judaism. It is its own distinct thing, and has to be respected as such.
Yeah. Well, what you find with these other faiths, whether it's Judaism or Islam, is they're always looking for a political revolutionary to be their Messiah, right? Which is the reason that they had Christ killed in the first place. And this has continued. They've been propping up these political revolutions ever since then, as if they are still in search of their Messiah. And when they missed the one that was given to them, because they didn't like the one that was given to them.
You know, it didn't serve their will, it served God's will. And that's where a lot of people
Yeah.
fall in, get in trouble. It's they want Christianity to serve their will, not God's will. And it's the other way around. You're supposed to be serving God's will. That's why he gave you Christianity.
One of the things that Matt Erickson and I have been working on is this concept of civilizational capital. The inspiration for it, I've said now multiple times. I get these intuitions, Tommy. Sometimes the the noose, the fog on my noose gets wiped clean a little bit, and I can just like see something.
Mm.
It's built on this concept that Nick Land, the philosopher, kind of put forward, in which he was saying that capital is the result of human competency. Whenever humans act competently over time, they generate and build capital.
Mm.
And you can think of that in a material sense. You can think that in a metaphysical sense. People should go check out 2-Bit Podcast on YouTube, Substack, a few of the places we're continuing we're combining it with a reading with Patchwork. Curtis Yarvin's mentions Mulbug's Patchwork, and kind of seeing where the two play together a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I say that to say this is that so one of the things I say is that we don't live in a civilization anymore. That Western civilization died at some point, possibly after the Cold War. You can put the death date whatever you like, but regardless, we don't live in a civilization anymore, and we need to, and our task is to build one. Now, as Christians, the wonderful thing is we've been given a roadmap. We've been given a blueprint for this. You know, and when people say, it's one of the things I like conspiracy theories. The ones I really don't like, and the ones I'm basically locking out of my brain, is this whole secret society, the Illuminati, who's controlling everything, and all the moves are taken over, and oh, you pitiful little thing, you're screwed, right? Like I think it's such a non-starter. One, I don't think it comports to reality. Yes, there are secret societies and bad people do bad things. Yes. And sometimes bad people can do bad things to a whole bunch of people. Yeah. History's full of this kind of stuff. But on a functional day-to-day ground level, you gotta still live your life. And as you said, you gotta live in this world, but not be of it. And one of the things I think which is hopeful is to take this Landian principle and to attach it to the project of civilization building. So, okay, we don't have a civilization anymore. So we don't even have a tribes anymore, where tribes have been smashed by liberalism and by this individualism mind worm. So our task before us is to build a tribe. And once we have a tribe, we can build a town or a village. And once we build a town or a village, we can start working competently and building capital, and we can invest that capital and eventually let that grow into a city, and it makes that city go into a civilization. You know, This is a generational project. This is not something that we will see the end of in our life. It's also something that's going to fail. I guarantee you. If it lasts 1,000 years, it'll fall within 1,000 years, and we'll be back where we started. Right. The hopefulness in this is that this is what we do. Like when you're in a civil frame, we build. Why? Well, because we're given the promise of the kingdom of heaven. We are trying to model Christ and God and his works as much as we can. Part of that is to build lesser kingdoms of heaven on this earth so that we can become good enough. We can learn, we can evolve spiritually. We can invest that spiritual capital. And my hope is that, let's say this thing actually works in some way, that at some point my descendants will have a civilization that will be automated to a certain degree. And I don't mean by robots or that, but I'm not excluding that possibility. But we'll get to that point where we can just then be in the business of producing saints. Because you hear about the competency crisis, the legitimacy crisis, the crisis this and crisis that. Really, what we really have is a saint crisis. We're not producing saints anymore, or very rarely. So may blessed Seraphim Rose be recognized and anointed, but we need more saints. We need to have our descendants be in a position where they can actively begin to pursue theosis in a genuine sense. So if we can generate the groundwork for that here and now with that hope and pushing that out to the pay it out into the future, I think that's about as noble of a ambition as as my poor little beleaguered brain can manifest. So, but from God's lips to mine ears to you fine people out there, this is the project we're undertaking in one way or another, and we'd love to have you on board.
Well,
that was my pitch, Tommy.
No,
you bring me on, and I got to pitch my stuff. So
I get it, but you said something, and it got my wheels turning. So you were talking about the secret societies, right?
Mm.
All right. So one of the problems that we have in modern society is we view everything from a materialist lens. So we view everything that it's got to be something that we can touch, that we can grasp, that we can see, that we can interact with physically on a day-to-day basis for it to be real. And I've come to the point where I think what's happened here is we get these conversations around secret societies and around people pulling strings because we've lost that doorway to the unseen. And really what's being described is the spiritual world. But people are so unfamiliar with the spiritual world and spirituality anymore, because we've allowed ourselves to become numb to it through consumerism and, widgets and gadgets and all this other stuff, that we confuse the spiritual with the material worlds. And so I think there is a conspiracy, and there always has been a conspiracy. I just think that the way people are diagnosing that conspiracy is incorrect.
To build on that, that's a really interesting point. To build on that, I think let's change the word a little bit. There are scandals, and there have always been scandals, and there always will be scandals. And there are those among us who are scandalous, who almost get off on a certain amount of scandal. And in this tense, I'm saying to act against God, to act in a manner that is against God in order to almost dare God. I am so powerful that I can do these things, and look, I get away with them. I can do as I wish because I am the most powerful, yada, yada, yada. It's pride.
Mm-hmm.
It's pride down to the core. It's pride with the individuals who are doing these things. And it's prideful for those who are constantly fearful and going on about these things. Because in that statement, there are these powerful people who are trying to control and manipulate and destroy us. You have to think that these powerful people care about you on some level. They recognize you on some level. I'm going to say something which some people are going to react to, but I think it's self-evident. They don't care about you or me or you or anyone. We don't factor in to their. It's more like, oh yeah, and we're going to do these things, and oh yeah, we these assholes over here. Excuse me, sorry. We got to deal with them, or we got to get these guys on board. We got to, yeah, right? Like there are manipulations and things. I almost like it's a weird kink, but at the end of the day, I don't think they care about manipulating us. You have to think about all the capital and energy and all that stuff they have to spend to do what? To like make us, act in a certain way, or what? Like, why would they be threatened by us? If what I'm saying is true and they are ultimately prideful, they're not going to be considering us as anything other than animals, dumb. What's one of the Davos terms? One of the guys from Davos called people
Well, I know,
worthless,
I know,
eaters or something like that.
yeah, I've heard that, but I know that Klaus Schwab in several of his books has described the majority of civilization as little better than house trained pets.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I refuse to give Klaus Schwab or any of those people any more power than they already have, first of all, in my life. And second of all, I look at them and I just pray. I find them pitiful,
mm,
that they've taken all this power and all this intelligence and all these things, and it's like, what are you doing with it? What have you built, really?
mhm,
Like, what are your great accomplishments? Where's your Rome?
mm,
Where's your great grand? Even if it's just self-serving and just for you guys, like, where
mm,
is it?
yeah,
You're doing nothing. You're building strip malls. Like, it's one of the things I bring up, example about civilizational capital, in the sense, it's like, you have the 1990s, end of the Cold War. Wow, amazing. You and I are the same age. You remember it. It was like there was a euphemism. There was like, sorry, not a euphemism. There was a sense of, of joy and like energy in the room. Like,
mm,
you know, money was coming out of everyone's ears, and it was a good time, right?
mm, mm,
Uh, and it's like, what did we build? Where did we take all that human capital? What did we do with it? We
mhm,
built strip malls,
yeah,
and like, where's the monuments? Nothing.
yeah, cookie cutter houses,
Right.
and yeah, yeah. There's no beauty.
So
Everything looks the same. It's just
because
carbon
yeah,
copies of the first copy. You know, it's just yeah,
yeah, it's unimaginative. It's pitiful.
right.
And I
Yeah.
refuse to say that these people are my betters, or they have any more control in my life than I allow them to have. No, screw that. We're doing our own thing. And then some of the pushback I get is like, whoa, they're going to do this and they're going to attack you. And I'm like, yeah, and
Okay.
it's going to rain sometimes. It's whatever.
It is what it is. What are they
So,
going? How's this going to really affect me? It's just
sometimes your ducks get eaten by coyotes.
mhm.
Sometimes they learn how to swim the middle of the pond. I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
it's just, you know,
Yeah, and so we just keep on keeping on, man. It's just the
that's
way it
it.
goes. All right, well, let's get started with the reading. We're going to go into chapter 1. This is the chapter is on Jesus's family as recorded in the Talmud. Um, this guy goes and digs into how he's come to these conclusions, given that he is a professor of religious studies and he's much more familiar with these texts than, let's say, I am. We're going to just read his words and we're going to take out of it what we can get out of it and see if we can't figure out where what it is that the rabbinic Judaism has against actual Christianity, and how they utilize their laws in the old covenant to try to destroy the new covenant. The rabbinic literature is almost completely silent about Jesus' lineage and his family background. The rabbis do not seem to know, or else do not care to mention, what the New Testament tells us: that he was the son of a certain Mary and her husband, or rather betrothed, Joseph, a carpenter of the city of Nazareth, and that he was born in Bethlehem, the city of David, and hence of Davidic origin. It is only in the Babylonian Talmud, and there in two almost identical passages, that we do get some strange information that may be regarded as a faint and distorted echo of the Gospel's stories about Jesus' family background and his parents. Since neither source mentions, however, the name Jesus, but instead resorts to the enigmatic names Ben Stada and Ben Pandera or Pantera, respectively, their relationship to Jesus is hotly disputed. I will analyze the Bavli text in detail and demonstrate that it indeed refers to the Jesus of the New Testament and is not just a remote and corrupt echo of the New Testament story. Rather, it presents with few words and in the typically discursive style of the Bavli, a highly ambitious and devastating counter narrative to the infant story of the New Testament. The
Is this
version,
where Pantera, the band, got its name? Do you think?
no, they got their name from a car.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah,
did the car get the name from this? Do you think?
possibly.
Connecting the dots here, Tommy.
Yeah. I actually thought that at one time too. And I was like, I wonder. And then I remember I ran into an interview with Vinnie Paul and he's talking about this Pantera car that he used to love. And so they named the band
Right.
after it. Yeah. The version of our story in Shab 104 is embedded in an exposition of the Mishnaic. I don't know how to say some of these words, so you are just going to have to bear with me. Mishnaic law, which regards the writing of two or more letters as work and hence forbidden on the Sabbath. The Mishnah discusses all kind of materials that might be used for writing and of objects upon which one might write, and states that the prohibition of writing includes also the use of one's own body as a writing object. From this, the logical question arises, but what about tattoos? Are they too to be regarded as writing and hence forbidden on Sabbath? According to Eliezer, the answer is yes. They are forbidden on Sabbath, whereas Rabbi Yehoshua allows it. In the Tosefta parallel, it is the sages. The Tosefta in both the Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmud elaborate further upon this Mishnah. According to the Tosefta, Eliezer responds to the sages. But did not Ben Satra learn only in such a way? In other words, did he not use the tattoos on his body as an aid to facilitate his learning? Hence, weren't they clearly letters and therefore forbidden to be written on Sabbath? This is bad enough, but the two Talmudim come up with an even worse explanation of why tattooing one's body on Sabbath is forbidden. When they have Eliezer ask, but did not Ben Stada bring forth witchcraft from Egypt by means of scratches, tattoos upon his flesh? In all three versions, the sages dismiss Eliezer's objection with the counter argument that Ben Satra, Ben Stada was a fool and that they would not let one fool's behavior influence the implementation of Sabbath laws. It is within this context that the Talmud proceeds with a clarification of the enigmatic fool's family background. The text is only preserved in the uncensored manuscripts and printed editions of the Bavli. I quote according to Manuscript Munich 95, with some variations in the footnotes. Let me talk about this for a second because there's some notes in the back. There's a lot of footnotes in this book. So when they're talking about tattoos, they're not talking about what we know as tattoos, permanent ink fixtures on your body. They're talking about like scratching, like etching into your skin, or taking ink quills and writing on your skin and coloring in order to perform magic. So it's a way of performing a spell that was written about in the Wisdom of Solomon, I think they said, and that it has to do with the Solomonic magic and the Kabbalah and the magic that was coming out of Egypt at the time. And so that's what they are accusing Jesus of, in engaging with these magical practices. And we see this kind of reflected in the Bible when he's accused of being a magician and involved in witchcraft, and that he can only cast out demons because he is of the devil and of Baal, and that's why he has the power to cast out the demons, because he's the Lord of the demons. So we kind of see this kind of parallel structure kind of happening, but they're specifically worried about him working on the Sabbath, which is something that also was going on within the biblical stories, when he was like healing people on the Sabbath and et cetera, et cetera. So this is just a continuation of them trying to find ways of saying that he was working on the Sabbath, doing things. So that what they're doing is they're attributing the healings and the miracles that he performed on the Sabbath, as with doing this magic in which he's inking or scratching, these magic spells into his skin so that he can perform this witchcraft. And that's kind of what the accusation is happening here.
It's interesting too, because when you think about how the ancients saw the body and the soul as being basically one. So physical, anything altering your physical appearance or altering the body in any way would be altering your soul as well, or your inner and outer worlds are combined, which is something we've kind of distanced ourselves in the material world. But I think you can see examples of that all the time. You see look at who was the New Zealand former New Zealand prime minister. When she took office, she looked a certain way, and when she left office, she looked like she'd had demons eating at her soul. It's a very different human being, and physically altering in a way that it would be hard to describe. Like, it's like, well, what happened to you? You look. It's not just that you look older, which happens. Like I used to be far prettier at one point, Tom, if you could believe.
It's hard to believe,
but
don't get much prettier than you.
It's I wear the mustache just to throw off the other ladies. It's a service for my wife. But the inner and outer. I mean, this is where we often hear about theosis, where priests or saints who are entering theosis actually begin to glow. Like there's a physical transformation that occurs. That's visible to people who are looking at them. And I think the reverse is the same. All this to say that I find stuff like this really fascinating, that because you're dealing with, let's say primitive technology, it's the altering of the body that is always kind of linked to the conditions of the soul. It's why leprosy was always so shunned. And it's not just because it was a disease, but it was like physically altering the body over time. And that people make like, oh, those are not just diseased people, but they're bad people. Like,
well, then that's why you had to, whenever you were healed of leprosy, you had to go get inspected by the priest.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're getting into the manuscript Munich 95. It was written in 1342 in Paris. So was he the son of Stada and not, on the contrary, the son of Pandera? Said Rav Hizda, the husband Baal was Stada, and the cohabitator lover was Boel, was Pandera. But was not the husband Baal Papos ben Yehuda? And for those that don't know, Ben in Aramaic means son of. So he's saying the son of such and such, which you'll hear Ben repeated over and over and over through this. And rather his mother, Stada. His mother was Miriam, the woman who let her women's hair grow long, Megadla, Sear, Nishea. This is, as they say about her in Pompaditha, this one turned away from, was unfaithful to her husband. This is a typical discourse of the Bavli, which tries to clarify the contradiction between two traditions. According to one received tradition, the fool magician is called son of Stada, and according to another one, he is called son of Pandera. What then is his correct name? In other words, the Talmud is concerned about the problem that the same person is called by two different names, and not about the question of who this person is. The answer to this latter question is obviously presupposed. Everybody seems to know. Two different answers are provided. First, Rav Hizda, a Babylonian Amora of the third generation and an important teacher at the Academy of Sora in 309 CE, suggests that the person in question had, as it were, two fathers, because his mother had a husband and a lover, and that he was called son of Stada when referring to the husband, and son of Pandera when referring to the lover. Against this, an anonymous author comes up with a different solution. No, he argues, his mother's husband was not some Stada, but rather Papos ben Yehuda, a Palestinian scholar, not portrayed as a sage and without the title rabbi, of the first half of the 2nd century CE. And in fact, it was his mother who was called Stada. If this is so, the last step of the mini discourse, and remember, Stada, as I was reading earlier, is Baal, right? Or what people call Bel, right? Sorry, I lost my spot now. If this is so, the last step of the mini discourse in the Bavli continues. We need to explain this strange name Stada for his mother. The answer: his mother's true name is Miriam, and Stada is an epithet which derives from the Hebrew Aramaic root sata sete, to deviate from the right path, to go astray, or to be unfaithful. In other words, his mother Miriam was also called Stada because she was a sota, a woman suspected or rather convicted of adultery. This anonymous explanation is located in Pumbeditha, Sura's rival academy in Babylonia. Hence, it becomes clear that both explanations begin with the assumption that our hero's mother had both a husband and a lover, and that they only disagree about the name of the husband, Stada versus Papos ben Yehuda. The name Pandera for the lover is made explicit only by Rav Hizda, but seems to be accepted in the Pumbeditha explanation as well, because it presupposes the mother's adultery and does not suggest another name for the lover. That Papos ben Yehuda is identified as the husband originates from another story in the Bavli, transmitted in the name of Rabbi Meir, that Papos ben Yehuda, when he went out, used to lock his wife in their house, obviously because he had reason to doubt her fidelity. This behavior on the part of Papos ben Yehuda is quite drastically compared to that of a man who, if a fly falls into his cup, puts the cup aside and does not drink from it anymore, meaning that Papos ben Yehuda not only locks away his wife so that she cannot go astray, but that he also refrains from intercourse with her because she has become doubtful. The dubious...
This is like the prototype for Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. I feel like it's all coming home, man. Yeah, the cream rises to the top, but not if a fly goes in it. Then I gotta throw it away.
The dubious reputation of our hero's mother is further emphasized by the statement that she grew her hair to a great length. Whatever the original meaning of the odd phrase, the context in Shabbat, Sanhedrin 67, clearly suggests that Miriam's long and apparently unfastened hair was indicative of her indecent behavior. Another passage in the Talmud describes the epitome of a bad woman as follows: she grows her hair long like Lilith. She sits when making water like a beast, and she serves as a bolster for her husband. Similarly, the story in Gittin continues with a bad man who sees his wife go out with her hair unfastened and spin cloth in the street with her armpits uncovered and bathe with other people. Such a man, it concludes, should immediately divorce his wife instead of continuing to live with her and having intercourse with her. A woman who appears bareheaded and with long hair in public, this seems to be presupposed here, is prone to all kinds of licentious behavior and deserves to be divorced.
Okay, wow. So let's just pause for a sec there, Tommy, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's so, of course, they're talking about the Theotokos here, the mother of God, and it's disturbing from a Christian perspective, obviously. But to put this aside for a second, and we'll just deal with them honestly. If this is what you believe, that the woman that the Christians believe and have exalted as the Holy Mother, you know, the essentially the Ark of the New Covenant in many ways, in Mary, who is not part of the Trinity, but I mean, is right up there, right? We pray to the Theotokos all the time. We exalt her as a mother of God. If you believe that these people are venerating what they're laying out here, basically an unclean, promiscuous woman who is having children out of wedlock, like that would color your perception of those people who revere this person. Like at that point, I think this is kind of interesting to get into. It's something that I've kind of played around with on the show a little bit. When you take a look at Zionism or some of these ideologies, if we agree that these people or enough of them truly believe in this worldview, if you truly believe that, and somewhere in the back of your head, that you live among people who are a few steps away from being triggered and acting genocide upon your people, well, what would you do? How would you think? How would you react to those people? Especially if you then get in positions, multiple positions of power, where you can manipulate messaging or be in positions to make you to enact your will upon the world. Well, if you think that you're always 2 minutes to midnight, and that the rest of the civilized world or uncivilized world wants to kill you and wipe you completely out, then a lot of those actions then start to make sense. Like, of course you would do this. Like, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not endorsing it. I'm not saying go out and do the same to them. It's like this creates an internal logic that's, from our perspective, absolutely mashugana, like crazy talk.
Yeah.
But internally it becomes consistent. And that's all we have to really examine is like, what do people believe in? The ritual and reality are one. So you're only as good as your information. You're only as good as your environment or your conditioning will allow you to be. And I think that's maybe another really good reason to read this book and examine it, is not to cast derisions or create scandal, but in order to, like, we need to know this. Like, we need to understand where someone's head's at. So when they start doing certain things, you're like, oh, okay. It's because you think I'm venerating, a streetwalker. So that would color your perception of me.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. You want to take a break?
Just a tad. Yeah, I'm going to have a smoke. Keep reading. I have you in my ears.
Well, I'm gonna pause. I need to turn my fan on. It's getting really hot in here, and then I was going to go use the restroom too.
You know what? I stream so often. Like, I'm always constantly looking at this for the stream thing. Like, you can edit this.
Well, I can just pause it too, and then I can just pick it right back up.
Yeah.
So
okay, just do that. Do that.
All right.
We'll be back in like 5 minutes.
Good deal. And we are back. Y'all didn't even know we were going. How's that work? Technology for you.
Magic.
If the Bavli takes it for granted that our hero's mother was an adulteress, then the logical conclusion follows that he was a mamzer, a bastard or illegitimate child. In order to be put in this mamzer category, it did not matter whether his biological father was indeed his mother's lover and not her legal husband. The very fact that she had a lover made his legal status dubious. Hence the uncertainty that he is sometimes called Ben Stada and sometimes Ben Pandera. But nevertheless, the Talmud seems to be convinced that his true father was Pandera, his mother's lover, and that he was a bastard in the full sense of the word. Searching for evidence outside the rabbinic corpus, scholars have long pointed to a remarkable parallel in the pagan philosopher Celsus' polemical, treatise Alethos Logos, written in the second half of the 2nd century CE, and preserved only in quotations in the church father Origen's reply contra Celsum. There, Celsus presents a Jew as having a conversation with Jesus himself and accusing him of having fabricated the story of his birth from a virgin. In reality, the Jew argues Jesus came from a Jewish village, from a poor country woman who earned her living by spinning. He, the Jew, says that she was driven out by her husband, who was a carpenter by trade, as she was convicted of adultery. Then he says that after she had been driven out by her husband, and while she was wandering about in a disgraceful way, she secretly gave birth to Jesus. And he says that because Jesus, was poor, he hired himself out as a workman in Egypt and there tried his hand at certain magical powers on which the Egyptians pride themselves. He returned full of conceit because of these powers, and on account of them gave himself the title of God. In another quotation, Celsus repeats these allegations put into the mouth of a Jew and even communicates the name of Jesus' father. Let us return, however, to the words put into the mouth of the Jew, where the mother of Jesus is described as having been turned out by the carpenter who was betrothed to her, as she had been convicted of adultery and had a child by a certain soldier named Pantera. This story has much in common with the short discourse in the Talmud. The hero is the son of an adulteress. He returned from Egypt with magical powers, and most important, the name of his mother's lover, his father, was Pantera. The only difference between the versions in the Talmud and in the Celsus is the fact that Celsus makes it explicit that the child born from the poor Jewish adulteress and the soldier Pantera was the very Jesus whom the Christians regard as the founder of their faith, whereas the Talmud keeps silent about the proper name of the child. But this does not pose a real problem because the Talmud, as we have seen, is not concerned about the identity of the child, but about the strange phenomenon of two different names used for his father. Moreover, several rabbinic sources do mention Jesus as the son of Pandera, and it can be safely assumed, therefore, that the Talmud presupposes the knowledge of this identity. The punchline of this attribution, of course, is the fact that Jesus, through his father, Pandera, becomes not only a bastard, but even the son of a non-Jew. Go ahead.
I mean, was he cheap too? Like what did he
He kicked my dog too.
Man, he farts at dinner like a freaking rodent. Like this guy he puts his feet up on the furniture, never says thank you. I mean, what is this guy? Who is this person?
This uncivilized beast.
Yeah, this is who you like. He picks his nose. Look, in temple, nonetheless. I mean, come on. Oh man.
Three congruencies make it highly probable that both the Talmud and Celsus draw on common sources, most likely originally Jewish sources, that relate that Jesus of Nazareth was a bastard because his mother was an adulteress, Miriam, and his father was her lover, Pandera. Some scholars, most radically among them Johann Mayer, want to conclude from the fact that the name Pantera is relatively common in Latin inscriptions and that the spelling of its equivalent in the Hebrew sources varies considerably. That there must have been some different Jesus with the patronymic Pantera, Pandera, Panteri, or similar forms, who cannot and should not be traced back to the one and only Jesus of Nazareth. Although such a possibility cannot be excluded, it does not seem very likely. The different versions of the name Pantera are still similar enough to be attributed to the same person, and such an attribution certainly does not require that all of the various forms of the name be philologically traced back to one your form, Pantera. Moreover, and more important, the name is not common at all in Hebrew or Aramaic, and this fact alone makes the connection with Celsus Pantera obvious. Celsus Jew in the late 2nd century CE and the Babylonian Talmud in a presumably early 4th century tradition refer to the same counter-narrative of Jesus' family background, which evidently is an intervention of and polemic against the New Testament narrative of Jesus' birth. Several motifs are characteristic. 1. Jesus returns from Egypt as a magician. In the New Testament, Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph, flee to Egypt with the newborn infant because King Herod threatens to kill the child, Matthew 2:13. Herod had heard about Jesus from the magicians who came from the east to pay tribute to Jesus as the newborn king of the Jews, Matthew 2:2. Egypt was regarded in antiquity as the classical land of magic, and Jesus is portrayed in the New Testament as well as in rabbinic sources as someone with supernatural powers, healing, commanding the demons, etc. That Jesus is labeled a magician in a derogatory sense is therefore an inversion of the New Testament, which connects him positively with magicians, with Egypt, and with healing powers. 2. Celsus portrays Jesus' parents as poor. His father was a carpenter and his mother a poor countrywoman who earned her living by spinning. The New Testament does not say anything about Mary's family background, but it mentions explicitly that Joseph, her betrothed, was a carpenter. Matthew 13:55. The Talmud remains silent about his parents' means, unless one wants to see in this strange epithet Megadla, Nishea, given to his mother an allusion not to her long hair, but to her profession as a manual worker. The Aramaic word Megadla can mean plating, but also weaving. 3. The most pungent counter argument against the evangelist narrative is, of course, the assertion of Jesus' illegitimate birth, from an adulterous mother and some insignificant lover. It parries the claim of Jesus' noble Davidic lineage to which the New Testament attaches such great value. Matthew starts with his genealogy in Matthew 1, which leads back directly to David and calls him as well as his father Joseph, son of David. Matthew 1:1, Matthew 1:20, Luke 1:27, Luke 2:4. He is born in Bethlehem, the city of David, Matthew 2:5, Luke 2:4, and hence is the Davidic Messiah, Matthew 2:4, Luke 2:11. No, the Jewish counterargument argues this is all nonsense. He is anything but of noble origins. His father was by no means a descendant of David, but the otherwise unknown Pantera, just a Roman soldier, according to Celsus, in other words, a non-Jew and a member of the hated Roman Empire that so visibly and horribly oppressed the Jews. Much worse, in turning Jesus into a bastard, the counter-narrative takes up the contradiction within the New Testament story about Jesus' origins and ridicules the claim that he was born from a virgin. The New Testament itself is remarkably vague about this claim. Matthew, having established Jesus' genealogy from Abraham down to Joseph, concludes with Jacob, who fathered Joseph, the husband of Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, who is called Messiah. Matthew 1:16. This is clear enough. Jesus is the son of the couple Joseph and Mary, and the Davidic lineage comes from his father Joseph, not from his mother. Only under this premise that Joseph was his real father does the emphasis put on his genealogy make sense. Yet after this dramatic beginning, Matthew suddenly reveals that Mary was not married to Joseph, but just betrothed, and that she expected a child before they were legally married. Matthew 1:18. This discovery troubled Joseph, who was a just man, and he decided to dismiss her. Matthew 1:19. But in a dream, it was revealed to him that her child was from the Holy Spirit. Matthew 1:20. When he woke up from his dream, Joseph took Mary as his legal wife and accepted her son. Matthew 1:24. The Jewish counter-narrative points to the inconsistencies within Matthew's birth story. It does not spend time on the legal intricacies of betrothal and marriage, but maintains that Joseph and Mary were indeed married, not just betrothed. This bizarre idea of having the Holy Spirit intervene to make him the father of Mary's child is nothing but a cover-up of the truth it maintains, namely that Mary, Joseph's legal wife, had a secret lover and that her child was just a bastard like any other bastard. Joseph's suspicion, whether he was Mary's husband or her betrothed, was absolutely warranted. Mary had indeed been unfaithful to him. He should have dismissed her immediately, as was customary according to Jewish law. Excuse me. This powerful counter-narrative shakes the foundations of the Christian message. It is not just a malicious distortion of the birth story. Any such moralizing categories are completely out of place here. Rather, it posits that the whole idea of Jesus' Davidic descent, his claim to be the Messiah, and ultimately his claim to be the Son of God are based on fraud. His mother, his alleged father, insofar as he helped covering up the truth, his real father, and not least Jesus himself, the would-be magician, are all impostors that deceived the Jewish people and deserve to be unmasked, exposed to ridicule, and thereby neutralized. Most striking, this counter New Testament, in a nutshell, has been preserved in rabbinic sources only in the Babylonian Talmud, and there almost in passing. I conclude this chapter with yet another story from the Babylonian Talmud, again only in the Bavli, that can be read as a parody of Jesus' birth from a virgin. It is part of a long disputation between the notorious Roman emperor and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah, in the course of which Rabbi Yehoshua travels to Athens to meet the Greek sages. Rabbi Yehoshua and the Athenians engage in a long discussion that aims at finding out who is cleverer, the Greek sages or the rabbi. Asked to tell them some fiction stories, he comes up with the following tale. There was this mule which gave birth, and round its neck was hanging a document upon which was written, "There is a claim against my father's house of 100,000 zuz." They, the Athenian sages, asked him, "Can a mule give birth?" He, Rabbi Yehoshua, answered them, "This is one of these fiction stories." Again, the Athenian sages asked, "When salt becomes unsavory, wherewith is it salted?" He replied, "With the afterbirth of a mule." And is there an afterbirth of a mule? And can salt become unsavory? These brief stories center around the well-known fact that mules, the offspring of a cross between a male donkey and a female horse, almost always are sterile. Both play with a double element of surprise. In the first case, the allegation that a mule not only can give birth to a cub, but that a particular cub was even born with a debt document bound around its neck. And in the second case, that salt not only can become unsavory, but that it can regain its flavor with the afterbirth of a mule. This, of course, has nothing to do with Jesus. But why the strange idea of a sterile mule giving birth, coupled with the not less strange idea of unsavory salt, that is presumably salt that has lost its taste? One could argue that what we have here are remnants of some kind of an early scientific discourse about the sterility of mules, and this is probably the easiest answer. But still, the connection of the miraculous offspring of a sterile mule with the salt regaining its taste by the afterbirth of a mule is suspicious. With regard to the unsavory, most likely insipid, salt, one immediately thinks of Jesus' famous dictum in the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. Jesus addresses here his disciples as the salt of the earth, more precisely as the new salt of the earth, because there is some other salt that has lost its saltiness and hence its taste. This other salt, with no taste anymore, can easily be understood as the people of the old covenant, which is no longer good for anything, thrown out and trampled underfoot. If we take this saying of Jesus as the foil against which our Bavli story was construed, the brief tale turns into a pungent parody of the New Testament. Excuse me. That was the middle of a sentence. That was a really bad place to pause. If we take this saying of Jesus as the foil against which our Bavli story was construed, the brief tale turns into a pungent parody of the New Testament claim of Jesus' followers as the new salt of the earth. These Christians, it argues, maintain that the salt of the old covenant has become insipid and hence useless, and that its taste was restored by the people of the new covenant through the afterbirth of a mule. But we all know that there is no such thing as the afterbirth of a mule, because the mule does not give birth, as much as we know that salt does not lose its taste. On this background, the miraculous offspring of the mule in the first story and the afterbirth in the second one gets an even more significant meaning. It can well be understood as a parody of Jesus's miraculous birth from a virgin. An offspring from a virgin is as likely as an offspring from a mule. The Christian's claim of Jesus' birth from a virgin and without a father belongs to the category of fiction stories, fairy tales just for fun. Moreover, this is the punchline of the second story. Jesus' followers, who claim to be the new salt of the earth, are nothing but the afterbirth of that imagined offspring of the mule, a fiction of a fiction. Read this way, our two little Bavli stories become indeed much more than an amusing exchange between the rabbis and the Greek sages. Rather, they offer another biting ridicule of one of the cornerstones of Christian theology.
Good reading, sir.
Except for that really bad pause there. Sorry about that, guys. That was my bad.
Oh man, when you had said earlier that you were feeling under weather and you wanted me to read, I'm like, ooh. Sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm not so good. It depends on, especially early in the morning where my brain's sort of like, it's gotta like rev up a little bit before I can take on the reading. Yeah, wow. We were kind of joking about just trying to make him the worst of the worst in every way, shape, or form, to essentially dismiss him. It's strange to me quite often with these people who claim this is a story or this isn't or whatever. If you're at all religious and you believe that there is a divine being that created all time, space, dimension, everything else, all of creation, everything came from this being, then nothing really is impossible. It's just things would act in accordance with what you believe this God generally does, or commands, and things that they don't. And or I should say that things that he doesn't. And so quite often, I mean, okay, you let's say you're starting with the position that the Jesus story and all this stuff is based on a lie, but to conclude that this is impossible, that God couldn't have done this, to me is strange, because especially from people who believe in burning bushes and
Right.
big giant boats and angels coming down from the heavens and destroying cities and turning people into salt, and the list goes on.
Right.
Moses doing the miracles. Okay, well, if you believe that Moses did these things, why wouldn't you believe that God would essentially impregnate a virgin and have a virgin birth? Like,
Right.
I don't see how this falls completely outside the purview of what God could do. Whether and certainly even within tradition, it doesn't seem to be like something. It's just that the fact that he hadn't done it before doesn't mean that I don't think mean anything.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I always try to tell people when I get in that conversation with them. I try to say it nicely. I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm just like, it's extremely hubristic to think that there's a God that can speak all of this into existence and you can understand the way he works, and that's just kind of the way I look at it. It's just like, it's beyond our comprehension how to rationalize these things, right? Because it's not rational. It's like meta rational, maybe. Like,
Sure. I mean, let's to even just to try to put your head anywhere close to it. Imagine you can see all of creation, the beginning, the middle, and the end, completely, clearly at all times, and you are capable of making actions, of doing interventions, of doing certain things at certain times to move it to where you wish it to go. Well, your actions at any given point to the people who are experiencing that action may seem bizarre or incredible, miraculous, whatever term you want to use, but to you it's just like, well, no, I have to do this in order to get you here. Like it'd be like saying, well, I got to tie my shoes in order to go out of the house. Like, yeah, of course this is what I have to do. Like,
right.
There's no other way of doing it. Like,
Right.
I could do it other ways, but it wouldn't be as effective as this. So
right.
That's what you get, deal with it. It's really, not to get too theological, but as we're reading about Jesus in the Talmud, but energies and essences, the energy and essence distinction is, like, again, one of those things that you got to get right. especially if you're Orthodox, because it basically summarizes a lot of these things into something that's very, I find, eloquent, where there's the sun, and let's say the sun is the essence in the sky. It's the essence of light and heat,
Mm-hmm.
and what we experience is the light and the heat. We don't experience the sun.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what it's like to be the sun. We
Mm-hmm.
don't. It's just the
But they
thing in the sky.
coexist. They exist together, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost iconic. Like, it's almost the sun is the icon of these energies that we experience, and we can understand the energies and how they affect us, and we can even harness them or do things with them.
Mm.
But and we understand, let's say, the relationship between the two things. But in terms of what this, how our relationship to the sun is conceptual.
Mm.
And I think this is God, is that we can understand to a degree the energies of God, the things that are representative in this world from God. But it's the nicest thing about Orthodoxy, I find. Maybe you can see this in other Christian denominations as well, is that at some point you just kind of kick it up to God.
Mm-hmm.
This is not on you, man. Like, don't break your brain on this one too much. Just go, God, and move on with your life.
Mm-hmm.
Things get a lot easier after that. Concentrate on what you got to do.
Well, and one of the things I found important about this chapter is I was raised Southern Baptist, right? And like the Baptists don't bother themselves with the trivialities of Mary. Like, it was like Mary was like a tool, basically. I guess that's the best way of describing how the Baptists view Mary. She was a tool that God used to bring in Christ. Like, there's not this whole theology around Mary, like I've discovered in Orthodoxy. But what I've found, because I found this book by St. John Maximovich, in which I'm about to read a chapter of. Don't worry, folks, it's only 3 pages. It's not a long book. It's not a long chapter.
If you're still with us, you're obviously a true believer. So just sit tight, get some BBC in your mouth, and we'll be okay.
And but he wrote this book. It's called The Orthodox Veneration of the Mother of God, and it was translated from, I think, from Russian by Father Seraphim Rose, and so he has a chapter in here, and it, when I read this chapter, it struck me that the way the Baptists do it, the way that Protestants view the Mother of God and view Mary as just this tool, seems minor. Like, when you're in it, like when you get, like, if you get in a conversation with a Catholic or whatever, it's like, okay, yeah, but that's just minor, But the way that St. John Maximovich describes it, he said, it's like, if you slander the Mother of God in order to bring in the divinity of Christ into question, and it's all for the same purpose, and you can see that plainly in that book, in that chapter, how it was all that slander of Mary was utilized to question the divinity of Christ. But so I'm gonna
an unclean chalice would give you polluted wine.
Mm-hmm.
So the vessel is just as important as the contents of the vessel,
right?
Especially when we're talking about a perfect being. You can't have impurities, suggested or otherwise.
Right. Now, and like I said, this is a short book. It's called The Orthodox Veneration of the Mother of God. This is chapter 3, Attempts of Jews and Heretics to Dishonor the Ever Virginity of Mary. Right. So this is another thing that the Baptists kind of fall into, is that she wasn't always a virgin, that after the birth of Christ, then she had relations with Joseph and had these other children that are named in the Bible as Jesus's brothers. And in Orthodoxy, the way the tradition is passed on is those were Joseph's children from, he was a widower, and those were his children from his former marriage. So it's kind of, there's this whole difference going on there. And like I said, it may seem like a small thing, but it's all used. That slander, that twisting of the story, it's all used. The Jewish slanderers soon became convinced that it was almost impossible to dishonor the mother of Jesus. And on the basis of the information which they themselves possessed, it was much easier to prove her praiseworthy life. Therefore, they abandoned the slander of theirs, which had already been taken up by the pagans. In this, and it mentions Origin against Celsus, which we were reading about in there, and strove to prove at least that Mary was not a virgin when she gave birth to Christ. They even said that the prophecies concerning the birth giving of the Messiah by a virgin had never existed, and that therefore it was entirely in vain that Christians thought to exalt Jesus by the fact that a prophecy was supposedly being fulfilled in him. Jewish translators were found, Aquila, Symmachus, Theodotion, who made new translations of the Old Testament into Greek, and in these translated the well-known prophecy of Isaiah 7:14, thus behold, a young woman will conceive. They asserted that the Hebrew word Alma signified young woman and not virgin, as stood in the sacred translation of the 70 translators, Septuagint, where this passage had been translated, behold, a virgin shall conceive. By this new translation, they wished to prove that Christians, on the basis of an incorrect translation of the word Alma, thought to ascribe to Mary something completely impossible, a birth giving without a man, while in actuality, the birth of Christ was not in the least different from other human births. However, the evil intention of the new translators was clearly revealed because of a comparison of various passages in the Bible. It became clear that the word Alma signified precisely virgin. And indeed, not only the Jews, but even the pagans, on the basis of their own traditions and various prophecies, expected the Redeemer of the world to be born of a virgin. The Gospels clearly stated that the Lord Jesus had been born of a virgin. How shall this be? Seeing I know not a man, asked Mary, who had given a vow of virginity of the archangel Gabriel, who had informed her of the birth of Christ. And the angel replied, the Holy Spirit shall come upon thee, and the power of the Most High shall overshadow thee. Wherefore also that which is to be born shall be holy, and shall be called the Son of God. Luke 1:34 through 35. Later, the angel appeared also to the righteous Joseph, who had wished to put away Mary from his house, seeing that she had conceived without entering into conjugal cohabitation with him. To Joseph, the archangel Gabriel said, fear not to take unto thee Mary thy wife, for that which is begotten in her is of the Holy Spirit. And he reminded him of the prophecy of Isaiah that a virgin would conceive. Matthew 1:18 through 25. The rod of Aaron that budded the rock, torn away from the mountain without hands, seen by Nebuchadnezzar in a dream and interpreted by the prophet Daniel, the closed gate seen by the prophet Ezekiel, and much else in the Old Testament prefigured the birth giving of the virgin. Just as Adam had been created by the word of God from the unworked and virgin earth, so also the word of God created flesh for himself from a virgin womb when the Son of God became the new Adam, so as to correct the fall into sin of the first Adam. Saint Irenaeus of Lyons, Book 3. The seedless birth of Christ can and could be denied only by those who deny the gospel, whereas the Church of Christ from the old confesses Christ, incarnate of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary. But the birth of God from the ever virgin was a stumbling stone for those who wished to call themselves Christians, but did not wish to humble themselves in mind and be zealous for purity of life. The pure life of Mary was a reproach for those who were impure also in their thoughts. So as to show themselves Christians, they did not dare to deny that Christ was born of a virgin, but they began to affirm that Mary remained a virgin only until she brought forth her firstborn son, Jesus. Matthew 1:25. After the birth of Jesus, said the false teacher Helvidius in the 4th century, and likewise many others before and after him, Mary entered into conjugal life with Joseph and had from him children who were called in the Gospels the brothers and sisters of Christ. But the word until does not signify that Mary remained a virgin only until a certain time. The word until and words similar to it often signify eternity. In the sacred scripture, it is said of Christ, in his days shall shine forth righteousness and an abundance of peace until the moon be taken away. Psalm 71:7. But this does not mean that then, when there shall no longer be a moon at the end of the world, God's righteousness shall no longer be. Precisely then, rather, will it triumph. And what does it mean when it says, for he must reign until he hath put all enemies under his feet? 1 Corinthians 15:25. Is the Lord then to reign only for the time until his enemies shall be under his feet? And David in the fourth Psalm of the Ascent says, as the eyes of the handmaid look unto the hands of her mistress, so do our eyes look unto the Lord our God, until he take pity on us. Psalm 122:2. Thus the prophet will have his eyes toward the Lord until he obtains mercy, but having obtained it, he will direct them to the earth. Blessed Jerome on the ever virginity of Blessed Mary. The Savior in the gospel says to the apostles, Matthew 28:20, lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Thus, after the end of the world, the Lord will step away from his disciples. And then when they shall judge the 12 tribes of Israel upon 12 thrones, they will not have the promised communion with the Lord. Blessed Jerome. He's quoting Blessed Jerome, if anybody doesn't understand what's going on. It's in parentheses at the end of the sentence for some reason. It is likewise incorrect to think that the brothers and sisters of Christ were the children of his most holy mother. The names of brother and sister have several distinct meanings, signifying a certain kinship between the people or their spiritual closeness. These words are used sometimes in a broader and sometimes in a narrower sense. In any case, people are called brothers or sisters if they have a common father and mother, or only a common father or mother, or even if they have different fathers and mothers, if their parents later, having become widowed, have entered into marriage, stepbrothers, or if their parents are bound by close degrees of kinship. In the gospel, it can nowhere be seen that those who were called there the brothers of Jesus were considered the children of his mother. On the contrary, it was known that James and others were the sons of Joseph, the betrothed of Mary, who was a widower with children from his first wife. This is written by Saint Epiphanius of Cyprus. Likewise, the sister of his mother, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, who stood with her at the cross of the Lord, John 19:25, also had children, who in view of such close kinship with full right could also be called brothers of the Lord. That the so-called brothers and sisters of the Lord were not the children of his mother is clearly evident from the fact that the Lord entrusted his mother before his death to his beloved disciple John. Why should he do this if she had other children besides him? They themselves would have taken care of her. The sons of Joseph, the supposed father of Jesus, did not consider themselves obliged to take care of one they regarded as their stepmother, or at least did not have for her such love as blood children have for parents, and such as the adopted John had for her. Thus, a careful study of sacred scripture reveals with complete clarity the insubstantiality of the objections against the ever virginity of Mary and puts to shame those who teach differently.
Mm.
So, and I thought that was important to read because that's basically a response directly to what we just read.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that sparked me, you're wearing your Death to the World shirt. And quite often when we think of the end times, the eschaton, the second coming, it's at the end of the world, right? When the world will be in jeopardy through revelations.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm talking possibly way out of my depth here. But if we consider the world in the Orthodox phronema as also meaning the passions, that the passions in the world are synonymous.
Mm-hmm.
and that when we bring death to the world, it's when we conquer our passions and are no longer beholden to them or have them have effect on us.
Mm-hmm.
So quite possibly, the end of the world in this scenario might be a day when humanity is no longer held captive by the passions, and that's when Jesus will come to us. I've said this, and this is just intuition talking, but people keep talking about the Antichrist, and I think there's elements always, right? The Antichrist may not be one singular man, may only be vestiges of energies that people then model, and maybe there will be a man who models all of them at some point. But I also think of it as that we're not good enough yet to deserve the Antichrist in some ways. Like we're so fallen at this point in history, that's in the West specifically, that there's no joy in taking it from us. Like if the devil is going to take, you think of the story of Job. Part of the devil's joy would be to have this man who is a true believer in God, one of the best, to make him fall. Now that would be a win. That would be a real splinter in God's eye. But to make us fall at this point, like, okay, like, we're already okay apparently with kids, performing genital mutilation and some of that. So like, we're not so we're really not we're not that high up on the ladder yet.
Right.
So I almost would think that, and again, please anyone correct me. I always try to avoid speaking anything that's heretical or pre-list, and if I do, it's by my own ignorance. But I would think something along the lines of that we'd actually have to become much better, much more in line with God before we could even possibly trigger that kind of response. Because again, to make us fall at this point is I'm sure it's a score no matter what, but I don't think it's I don't think you're winning any games with it.
It's an interesting thought. Like I don't guess I've really thought that much of how that would look or when it would come, because I don't really feel like that's kind of, I got my own things to worry about.
Yeah.
I have my own issues to deal with.
Yeah.
So I don't.
What do we started off with this conversation saying, like, secret society is ruling everything. I feel that almost in some ways there's some people who seem to be very obsessed about the eschaton. And there's something prideful in that too, where it's like the end of the world's happening and it's happening in your lifetime. Aren't you special? You're the one that finally it's all going to come down during your lifetime and you're going to get to witness it.
But that's not, but that's nothing new. I mean, even the disciples thought that way. So I don't really consider, think much about that either. So it's just, like I said, it's not something I'm like obsessed in. I do have this what is it, Andrew of Caesarea commentary on the apocalypse, and then Constantinu, I can't remember how to pronounce her name, her breakdown of Andrew of Caesarea in his apocalypse commentary. I need to dig into that at some point, but I haven't even made it that far into my journey yet. That's one of those things that's upcoming.
What we need to do is do a Kickstarter campaign so we can build Tommy a library. It's the Tommy Salmon's library that they can all itemized.
Got all kinds of stuff around here.
Yeah, man.
I got stuff next to me and stacked up here and over there, and there's books there's books just upstairs. Saying. They're not all mine. Some of them were my dad's that he left here. And stuff. So it's just, there's a lot of fiction in here too. So yeah, I read a lot of fiction. That was like really my crutch growing up, was I was just read fiction constantly. Yeah. But all right, man, we'll plug away. I think we got it. A good one in here.
2-Bit Podcast. I'm Jason Marinchuk, 2-Bit Podcast. We are available on YouTube, Spotify, all the podcatchers out there, Substack. There's a Patreon. If you go over the page, you can find it. Go to my X account at 2-Bit Podcast. It's 2-Bit Podcast. It's the number 2, BITPODCAST, right? Yeah, all one word. You can find me on X. You can find me all the places. Say hi. Drop in. I always like knowing that there's people listening. That's it's very encouraging, and I thank every single one of you who have blessed me with your attention. It is always it's a weird thing, man. It's a weird thing we do, but yet we're here. There's also you can join up on YouTube to the Friend Not Fed members thing majig. It's $2 a month. We put extra content, live shows after the shows, and so on and so forth over there as well. So please go check that out if you can. I think that's about it, really.
All right.
Yeah. We got some really interesting guests coming up, depending on when you listen to this in the future. Or we've had some really interesting guests on. You should go back in the library and check that out. I don't know. I don't know how this time thing works, but
it's gonna be a couple of weeks, but it's coming up.
Yeah. Tommy, thanks again, man. I appreciate it. Let's do this again next month or sometime in March.
Yeah, we'll get into chapter 2 sometime in March.
Excellent.
Cool. Stop the recording.